Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. This is my second installment in VRs to the tag Top 10 Guidebooks. And apologies to Lisa Papez. She actually started this tag. I misattributed it in my prior installment of a VR, so I apologize to Lisa. I'm linking Lisa's video that started the Top 10 Guidebooks tag below, which is also the first video in a playlist that Lisa is including on her channel with all of our VRs to it. So if you're looking for great guidebooks, do check out the link below and you'll find all of those VRs in one place. In my prior video, I talked about tarot guidebooks. In this video, I want to talk about guidebooks that are for other systems. So they're mostly Oracle deck guidebooks, but there are a few other systems represented as well. I will say that this was much harder for me than coming up with the top 10 tarot guidebooks. When it came to top 10 tarot guidebooks, I felt a little bit spoiled for choice, if anything. I had quite a few that I could have included on the top 10 list but didn't. Whereas Oracle decks, I kind of had the opposite problem, looking through my collection and thinking, okay, what will I include? I found 10 that I'm very happy with and very happy to recommend. But with my Oracle collection, or like any other divinatory system collection being smaller than my tarot collection, I had fewer choices to work with. And a lot of the Oracle decks that I really love actually don't have guidebooks. So it took some thinking and going through my list of what exactly is in my collection to jog my memory of what would be my top 10. But I'm excited to share them with you. I'm going to timestamp below in a kind of non-spoilery way, just for Guidebook 1, Guidebook 2. If you just want to skip ahead and see what I picked, rather than listening to me ramble for what you know will probably be a long time, then you can. But I'm excited to share these 10 guidebooks with you and why I love them so much. And again, these 10, like in the last video, are in no particular order other than the order that they are on the stack that's sitting beside me. It's not a countdown or anything like that. It's just 10 guidebooks that I love. The vast majority of these are in print and available in one form or another. I know, I think one or two of them are available more as PDFs now, but most of them are in print. The first one I'm going to talk about is the only one I think that I'm not sure if it's in print right now or not, but I had to include it on this list because I love it. That is The Explorer's Journal of Wonder Walking by Amy T. Wan. You can see the beautiful metallic on the cover here. This is the guidebook that is sold separately and goes along with Amy's deck, which is called a deck for wonder walking. It's a watercolor painted deck designed to facilitate reflection while one goes for a walk or goes on an adventure outdoors. And it can also be used, of course, as an oracle deck for readings. It comes with a little pamphlet, but this book goes far beyond the pamphlet. It's also just a beautiful book with the watercolor illustrations in a larger size. This deck would be a great one to just have out and to work with as a set of reflection prompts. Even if you didn't have the deck, I think it would be a good book to work with. So for each of the cards, you get a description of the concept that the card represents, some interpretations, which are essentially keywords, a discussion of the symbolism. There is a suit system in this deck as well, so that is covered. And then there's a section called Observe This on Your Wonder Walk, and it's a series of questions and ideas and things to look for. You then get a page for each card called Activities to Try. And it's exactly what it sounds like, activities to try. And then there's a page of Journal This, where you can write in answers to some reflection questions that are provided for each card. I cannot bring myself to put my horrifying handwriting in this beautiful art object. I just cannot. So I have journaled with the prompts in this book, but I have not journaled physically in this book. I never will. It's just really beautiful. And there are some suggestions as well on new ways or other ways to work with the deck that are not covered in the little pamphlet that comes with the deck. So there are some spreads at the back and some other activities at the beginning as well, in terms of suggestions for what goes in your adventure kit and why you might put it there, what to bring on a wonder walk. There's information about the suits, which in this deck are called the 4 realms of enchantment: the physical, the creative, the influence realm, and the inner realm. There's some imagery depicting the entire deck. This is just a really beautiful book, and also one that brings a lot of added functionality, is the wrong word, but added ways to engage with the deck that go well beyond the little pamphlet that is in the deck. Now, the little pamphlet that comes with the deck is absolutely sufficient to work with the deck, but this is really an extra treat, and it is well worth the extra spend to have this book separately. So that's the first one on my no particular order list. The second book that I want to talk about, I actually don't have in a physical copy to show you, but it's not really a guidebook either. So this is, I'm a cheater on the prompts. What can I say? I interpret things in a broad way that suits what I actually want to talk about. So the book that I want to talk about goes with this wonderful deck called The Threadbound Oracle, which is by Cedar MacLeod, who's also the creator of the Numinous Tarot and the Uncertain Oracle. And the back of this deck reads, "Paper, ink, thread, sun, moon, stars, a magical library deck for asking questions, seeking answers, and finding a family among the books." And it's boxed to look like a book, which is really cool. And this deck does come with a guidebook inside. And this is a good guidebook. It has plenty of information for each card. It has suggested ways of working with the deck, not just for divination, but also for storytelling and coming up with characters and scenarios and things like this. It's really creative. This is good, but what I really wanted to include on my list, which I only have in an ebook edition, is The Thread That Binds, which is a novel written by Cedar MacLeod that goes with this deck. So all of the people that are depicted in the cards in this deck are characters in Cedar's novel, The Thread That Binds. And it is a novel about a magical library and about found family. And it is just a really great book that I really enjoyed reading. It is going to have a sequel, I believe, which I am very eagerly looking forward to. And so, there's no reason that you can't work with this deck or you can't enjoy this deck without reading the novel. If, perhaps if just fantasy novels aren't your thing, that's okay. You don't need to know who all the people are in order to read with this deck. The little guidebook inside here gives plenty in terms of meanings, but reading the novel makes this deck all the more special, and having this deck makes the novel all the more special. I think that Cedar really came up with something special with this project, and so again, even if this particular deck doesn't interest you, I would absolutely suggest checking out Cedar's website and seeing if you can get a copy, digital, or there's physical copies as well, of their novel, The Thread That Binds. It was really a good read. So that's book number 2. Book number 3 is an Oracle deck guidebook. And the guidebook that I wanted to include for here is for the Spirit Doodle cards by Elrond Mills, Space Between the Notes, on YouTube and Instagram. And the Spirit Doodle cards are, as they sound, like doodles. They're quite abstract cards. You can see some representations of the cards in the deck inside the guidebook. And so there's a small color representation of each card in the book, which is a cool thing. But this guidebook is so good. This guidebook is as good as the deck. In my opinion, it's a deck that I love to work with. This guidebook is a big part of the reason that I think that this deck is so great. And there are quite a few reasons for this. I think that Elrond has done correspondences in this book really better than any Oracle guidebook that I can think of. So for each of the cards, there are prompts, keywords, shadow keywords, an emotion when you get the card, an emotion to develop when you get the card, an affirmation, a self-care activity, curated musical suggestions, and then correspondences for tree, animal, element, chakra, crystal, guide, and some extra correspondence suggestions, which include all different things to think about that are interesting and unique. In addition to all of that correspondence, there's also quite a lot of text. So for one card like this one, the correspondences don't even start until the next page. You get all of this text. And it is welcoming and friendly and thoughtful, and it really lends some shape, I guess, to a deck that is very abstract. And I think that the way that this is done is absolutely fantastic. In addition to all of the per card content, there are also 4 different spreads included, or 3 different spreads included, which are unique to this deck. There's a solve the problem spread, a connection to spirit spread, and a spread identifying gifts that you have to develop and enjoy. There's also an explanation of all of the different sections, all the different correspondences, what they are based on, and Elrond's thinking in terms of making these pairings. It gives so much information that I would not want to not have this book in my collection. I certainly wouldn't want to have the deck without the book. The book just adds so much. There is so much value and so much content in this little book. Highly, highly recommend. And absolutely one of the first books that I thought of to put on this top 10 list. Next up, I have actually 2 books by, there's a couple of authors in this top 10 that are included more than once. And this is the first. I have included the guidebook for the Journey Tokens Divination System by Kelly Fitzgerald, The Truth and Story, of course, on YouTube and elsewhere. Now, this is a system, the Journey system, which Kelly has created in a couple of different media. So there are the tokens, which are these wooden tokens that you can draw out of the bag and lay out in a spread, or that you can cast perhaps onto a casting cloth, for example. And then there is also the Journey Oracle deck, which is watercolor painted. The cards are the same hexagonal shape as the tokens are, and the cards have the title, the keyword, and they have the symbol that goes with the tokens. So there are actually, I believe, 2 very slightly different versions of this book. I think that the tokens, I believe, came out first. And so there's the Journey Tokens Divination System. There's also a guidebook for the Journey Oracle for the cards. Much of the content, as I understand it, is the same or very similar. Now, this guidebook has a section, for example, on casting systems, which would not be especially relevant to the card version. But other than that, it includes a lot of information about each symbol and its significance. And this is just a system that I really like, that I can really relate to. It has a lot of correspondences that are present in other parts of my practice in terms of elements and directions, upper, middle, and lower worlds. There's a lot of symbolism in here. Moon phases, seasons, that is quite integral to my work in other ways. So this is a deck and a token system that I really enjoy working with, and the guidebook makes it very clear, makes it make a lot of sense. There are some different spreads in here, and the spreads are really designed with the hexagonal shape of the journey system in mind, like the honeycomb spread, for example. And there's different shapes of layouts that are really interesting to read in a directional, relational way that I really like. In terms of the guidebook organization, there's also a quick visual reference at the back where you get all of the symbols and then just the page number of the book that they're on. This seems like a small thing, but when you're trying to look for it in the book and you can't remember what the symbol is titled, this just makes navigating the book a lot easier, which I think is a good thought. There's also the quick keyword reference here on the corresponding page, and areas in the book for you to write in your own correspondences if you would like. For example, for correspondences for fire, correspondences for animals, things like this, and some suggested further reading as well. So this is a great system, and the book makes the system comprehensible in a great way. There's also a printout that you can make to do a kind of grand tableau with all of the tokens, which is pretty cool as well. So Journey Tokens and or Journey Oracle Cards by Kelly Fitzgerald guidebook. The next guidebook, which is also Kelly's, is The Story in Color Lenormand. This is definitely a top 10 for me as well. This is the guidebook that made Lenormand accessible to me as a member of the 2S LGBTQ plus community. You know, I basically looked at the man and woman cards in Lenormand and thought, like, nope. And the first book that I read on Lenormand, which was Kathleen Matthews' book on Lenormand, did speak a little bit to reading for same-gendered relationships, essentially, in it, but the book, like, it really didn't do a great job of that, and it certainly didn't present it in a way that made me want to read Lenormand. Like, not even a little bit. But this is so good. This is inclusive. The way that Kelly has handled those cards as the querent and significant in this deck, just making them non-gender specific, and with it being an abstract, watercolor deck, they don't depict people, right? So the querent is signified here, and the significant signified here is perfect, right? It's perfect in my view for reading for anyone, including reading for myself. It is also a really good standalone Lenormand resource, in my opinion. I'm not a Lenormand expert. It's not a system that I, use predominantly. I have done some Lenormand study, and this book is really good on its own. She does have extra resources listed at the back, which is always helpful. I know I always want to read more about any system that I'm studying. But what Kelly has done for each of the cards is first provide an explanation of the card in Lenormand, and then provide an explanation of her thoughts in creating the painting to represent it, why the colors were chosen, why the kind of shape was chosen. Some of the shapes are more evocative of what they depict than others. Like, certainly you can see a bouquet, in this card, to me anyway, whereas others are even more abstract than that. And so this gives a good sense of the artistic thought processes as well as the Lenormand meanings. There are also sections on how to read Lenormand with a 3-card spread with some examples, reading a 9-card spread with some examples, and reading a grand tableau with some examples. So if this is all that someone had to start reading Lenormand, you can get off to quite a good start with this, which I think is hard to do in a package that is this small, particularly when you want to have, full page representations of the cards too. So this is a fabulous, fabulous Lenormand guidebook. Highly recommend to Lenormand enthusiasts. Next up on my pile of top 10 guidebooks is a book that is actually an oracle, completely in and of itself, and that is Elemental Divination, a Dice Oracle by Stephen Ball. This book is it's a dice oracle, it's also bibliomancy, and the way that this is written involves rolling 3d6, and 2 of them will tell you 2 elements. So since it uses d6, they have to have 6 elements in the book, which are fire, air, water, earth, sun, and moon, all of which are very clearly explained in the book. So you roll 2, and that tells you 2 different elements that are interacting. And then the third that you roll, if it's 1 to 3 versus if it's 4 to 6, tells you which of the 2 interacting elements is stronger than the other. So it starts to prompt you to think, what does it look like for water to come in and overpower fire? What does it look like for air to overpower earth, right? And what do those interactions mean when we think about the energetic kind of meanings of these different elements? And so there's a write-up of about 1.5 pages to 2 pages for each of the possible combinations that could arise. And they're really well written. They're really thoughtful. They're great this would be great for meditation prompts, I think, even if you didn't want to have dice and you didn't want to use it in that way. You could just kind of open to a page and have that be the way of finding which one was your message of the day. This is really good for kind of like checking the energetic weather of the day with a single reading, a single dice roll. There are suggestions for other ways to use it in here as well. It is really, really well explained for a system that is entirely new, right? It's not really based on, certainly the elemental correspondences will be familiar to a lot of people, but this kind of interactional dice system is completely unique to this book, and it's explained really clearly. The author has included a appendix that is really useful to helping to find which page you want. And this is a really great, I can't think of too many cases where, a very contemporary, very recent instances of people coming up with completely new systems that I think are really interesting, really novel, and work really well. And this is definitely one of them. I love working with this book. So is it quite an Oracle guidebook? I don't know. I guess so. It's an Oracle book, right? Highly, highly recommend this. I think it's fantastic. I use it all the time. Yeah, really, really great. This was another one that was kind of one of the really obvious ones that jumped to mind to put on this list. Really, really good. The next book on my list is The Living Altar, an Oracle and Spell Deck for the Radical Witch by Kiki Robinson and Ilva Droma Marzana Radishevsky. I hope I'm saying that right. And this is a Oracle deck that I frequently use in non-divinatory ways. This for me is a deck that is altar cards, display cards, cards to put out as a kind of anchor to a reading. Put out, for example, the new moon card if I'm doing a reading on the new moon. Things like this. Have out during seasonal rituals, solstices and equinoxes on my table, and so on. There are also some really great spreads for reading with this deck included in the guidebook, which are Spread of the Moment, a go-to all-purpose spread, which is great. Elemental harmonizing spread. There are strong elemental aspects to the organization of this deck. The remything spread, which has to do with letting go of false ideas as we learn and grow. some intention setting spreads, and that's about it. This deck has quite an intricate, I would say, system of kind of sections of cards, like suits, and the book explains it quite well. There are a couple of little typos in the book, where things have been copy and pasted and have not quite landed where they were supposed to land, but that's not a big deal to me. I'm far more interested in the content. But I think it's Anna at Astro Lady Tarot has made a video explaining the couple of places where those issues crop up. That was very helpful to me. I just went through with a little paper stickers and pasted them in, just in those couple of places where an element was misnamed, for example. So for each card in this deck, the guidebook includes correspondences on a witch's wheel, which is explained thoroughly in here. It includes a spell, which has kind of I statement language that one could read out, and some guiding messages, and you get an image of the card itself. So that's about how much material you get for each card, which is good. This is plenty. I put in extra note paper in the back. I don't know what I was doing there, but so there's plenty in here to use this as an oracle deck, or to use it in other ways, and all of that is great. Now, what I love though about this guidebook, in addition to all of that, is that this is a guidebook with a very, very explicit, radical, and liberatory politic that really appeals to me and resonates with me, and that I think is really important. And I feel like, looking at my oracle deck collection, there's really not much, if anything else, in the oracle deck collection specifically that does anything like that. In the tarot side of my collection, certainly I can think of, the Fifth Spirit Tarot Guidebook, or the Next World, or Slow Holler, and these decks that have, a very explicit, I want to say, for me, like, anarchic, anti-oppressive politic woven into the deck. In the oracle deck space, I don't see a lot of that, or at least I haven't found a lot of that is also in my collection. If you know some like radical, awesome oracle decks, like, tell me. But this is one, and I really appreciate that aspect of this book very much. In addition to just really liking the system that the deck has. So the voice of this book, I think, is a really important one, and I appreciate it very much for that. I've put, it's got Post-its. Post-its are a good sign, right? For me, Post-its in a book are a good sign. Okay, 3 more books to go. I'm going to talk about the next 2 together because they're by the same creator, and I like them for effectively the exact same reasons. And those 2 books are the Saltwater Reading Cards Guidebook and the Dreamtime Reading Cards Guidebook, both by Laura Bowen. So the Dreamtime Reading Cards is Connect with the Ancient Spirit and Nature of Australia, and Saltwater Reading Cards is Journey with the Messengers of the Sea. And these are rock pool decks. And the guidebooks are quite similar. Obviously the content is all completely different. But this one, which is the one that I had first and love, this is one of my favorite oracle decks, has an introduction, how to use the cards, working with salt water, and then content for each card with a full color image and a message there. And these are cards that do have keywords on them, so just a quick keyword. So for example, lionfish has the keyword individuality on the card, but then in the book you get this much more extended reflection on that theme. The Dreamtime reading cards have an introduction, how to use the cards, which again has a couple of spreads in it, interpreting your own messages from nature, and then the same layout of a card represented in color, and then the write-up for the card here. And these are just really well written. They are messages that feel really always on point for me. It's hard to explain why I love these so much, because so much of why I love these so much is just my experience working with these particular decks. And most of the time when I'm working with Oracle decks, I don't even necessarily use a guidebook. And I like to read Oracle cards in spreads. I like to read them, if I have a spread with positions, I'll have a tarot card and an Oracle card, for example. But these are decks that I think are really amenable to single card draws, which, some people love a single card draw, some people don't do them at all. But a single card draw and just reading the message out of this book is a really good way to start the day, I think. Laura writes beautifully. They feel supportive without feeling too kind of glossing over anything difficult. Like, they don't feel like decks that gloss over difficult concepts at all. But the messages are messages of support, of reminders and lessons from the creatures and environments and places and concepts that are represented in these decks. And they're really great. They're really great books and really great decks to work with. And so these are highly recommended from me as well. Finally, the last one that I will mention is not an Oracle card deck exactly, but it is an Oracle guidebook. And that is the Geomantic Visions by James Eads. This is a guidebook that goes along with some geomancy coins that James R. Eads created. These were a Kickstarter, but they're definitely still around and available. And I think, maybe this is not a nice thing to say, I think that the guidebook is actually better than the coins, in my opinion. For casting a geomancy shield chart, the coins that this comes with are not my go-to tool. They have never been my go-to tool. I like dice. And when you use the coins, there's 16 geomancy figures and there's a coin for each one. So you would have to put, this is not a geomancy tutorial, but you would have to have the 16 coins in a bag, draw one out, and then put it back in, shake up the bag, draw one out again, put it back, shake up the bag, draw one out, because you draw 4, but you can have repeats in geomancy. So you would have to put the coin back each time in order to always be drawing from the full set. And I find that somehow cumbersome rather than just rolling 4 dice 4 times. So the coins I don't actually use, but the book is good. And this is a good standalone geomancy resource if someone just wanted to learn some basics of how to begin to work with geomancy. The one kind of quibble I have with this book is that I find the font not the most accessible or legible. It's kind of a font that looks a little bit like you wrote with a pencil, aesthetically pleasing, but not the most accessible. But this is really well explained in terms of geomancy, and there aren't a lot of geomancy, like great geomancy book resources out there. He has a very short bibliography here, and that pretty much encapsulates all of them, and he's even included like Wikipedia, right? He's included the Digital Ambler, which is a great website for geomancy content. I would also add Kelly Fitzgerald from the Truth and Stories Geomancy class, which is my first resource and first pick. But as a book, this is a really good explanation of a system that is not necessarily the easiest one to get started with. It depicts the shield castings clearly. It explains the steps to doing a geomancy reading clearly. It explains the astrological components to how to perfect a shield chart with examples quite clearly. So in terms of a tool that you can use to cast a geomancy reading, and it comes with a resource that teaches you how to do that, this is a really good package for that. You don't really need to buy tools to do geomancy. You can just use dice. You can use dots on a piece of paper. You could make some staffs on popsicle sticks. There's lots of ways that you could read geomancy without buying something as kind of fancy as these coins. The coins are beautiful, and they're represented in full here. They have an image on one side of the coin, and then the geomancy figure with the dots on the other. So they're also a good learning tool. But the book for me is actually the standout in that package, because it is a good self-contained. You know, he does say in the book that this is not on its own going to make you an expert on geomancy, not by any stretch. But as a place to get started, this is quite good. And so on that basis, you know, and it's something that I don't think exists in the market really as a kind of set. I think that this is a really good guidebook for learning geomancy, and so I recommend it for that reason. That is my top 10, installment number 2. If you tell me to talk about 10 books, you know I'm going to find a way to talk about more. So just VR twice. That's my top 10 guidebooks for systems that are not tarot. I've enjoyed sharing them with you. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about them. If you have some favorite Oracle guidebooks, do let me know in the comments. I'm sure there are many that I don't know about and haven't encountered yet, and I would love to hear about them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Have a good one.